The crocodile paradox. Imagine yourself standing on the muddy bank of a winding river, the air thick with humidity and the earthy scent of damp reeds. Your child has just been taken by a crocodile, its powerful jaws snapping shut as it glides back into the murky water. Your heart races, and your mind is spinning, desperately searching for any way to save them. Then, in an almost surreal twist, the crocodile's cold, unblinking eyes break the water's surface. It speaks not in growls or hisses, but in clear, deliberate words. I will return your child if and only if you can correctly predict what I will do next. At that moment, the world seems to stop. Everything around you, the rustling leaves, the rippling water, even the beating of your own heart, fades into the background. What was already a life or death situation now becomes something far more insidious. A logical trap. This isn't just a predator playing with its prey. It's a paradox, one that has puzzled philosophers and thinkers for centuries. You're caught in an impossible dilemma. The crocodile's challenge isn't about strength or bravery, but about reasoning, and no matter what you say, you sense that the game is rigged. If you predict the crocodile will return your child, and it intends to do so, your prediction is correct. The crocodile, bound by its strange promise, releases your child, and you embrace them with tears of relief. But if the crocodile intends to keep your child, your prediction is wrong. It isn't obligated to return the child at all. At first glance, this seems straightforward. Either you guess right and save your child, or you guess wrong and lose them. But the paradox sharpens in the second scenario. Suppose you predict that the crocodile will not return your child. If the crocodile intends to keep the child, then your prediction is correct, meaning, by its own rules, it must return the child. But that contradicts its intention to keep the child in the first place. On the other hand, if the crocodile intends to return the child, your prediction is wrong, so it's not required to give the child back. Yet in doing so, it violates its own logic. The crocodile is trapped, and so are you. Whatever decision it makes creates a logical contradiction. It cannot keep the child without invalidating its own promise, nor can it return the child without breaking the conditions it set. This is the essence of the crocodile paradox, a self-referential loop where logic collapses in on itself, leaving no resolution. Much like the famous liar's paradox, where someone declares, "This statement is false." The crocodile paradox exposes the limits of certainty and truth. If the statement is true, it's false. If it's false, it's true. The crocodile's challenge operates on the same slippery ground, where language twists back on itself and creates an unresolvable puzzle. But the paradox doesn't stop there. Beneath the surface of this logical knot lie deeper questions about promises, power, and trust. What does it mean to make a promise that can't logically be kept? Is it really a promise at all? And if the rules of the situation are constructed in such a way that no outcome can be fair or consistent, can any action within that system be considered just? Think of legal contracts filled with contradictory clauses, or political agreements where promises are made under impossible conditions. The crocodile paradox mirrors these real-world scenarios, where the structure of an agreement is flawed from the start. The crocodile, in this story, isn't just a passive participant. It's the architect of the trap. By crafting a condition that folds in on itself, it ensures that no matter what happens, it retains control. In this way, the crocodile embodies authority systems designed to maintain power through contradiction. Governments, corporations, and institutions sometimes create frameworks where the rules themselves prevent resolution. They keep you locked in a loop, not unlike the crocodile's deal, where every choice feels like a step deeper into the snare. Philosophers have debated the crocodile paradox for centuries. Can it be solved? Most agree that it isn't meant to be solved at all. It's a thought experiment, designed not to yield an answer, but to expose the boundaries of reasoning. It forces us to recognize that language and logic, while powerful, have limits. Some questions are traps, and the more we struggle to untangle them, the tighter their hold becomes. But there's another layer to this paradox, an emotional one. Imagine standing at that river's edge, facing a creature that holds your child's fate in its jaws. The raw terror, the desperate hope, the overwhelming sense of helplessness. Here, the paradox isn't just about abstract logic. It's about control. The crocodile dictates the terms, and by doing so, it dictates your choices. It's a reminder that sometimes the power dynamic in a situation matters more than the reasoning within it. Perhaps the true lesson of the crocodile paradox is this: not every question has an answer. Not every problem can be solved by pure logic. And sometimes, the only way to win is to step outside the game entirely. When faced with impossible conditions, the wisest move may be to recognize the trap for what it is, a system rigged from the beginning. So if you ever find yourself staring into the cold eyes of a crocodile, offering an impossible deal, remember, some battles aren't meant to be fought on the terms you've been given. The crocodile's paradoxical challenge isn't a riddle to solve, but a warning, a reminder that in life, as in philosophy, not every question leads to clarity. The friendship paradox. Have you ever felt as though your friends seem to have more friends than you do? Perhaps it's a quiet thought that drifts into your mind as you scroll through social media, seeing pictures of parties, group trips, and endless interactions. It's not just your imagination. It's a real phenomenon known as the friendship paradox. This paradox is one of those strange quirks of life where the more you think about it, the more it challenges your understanding of how relationships and social networks work. At its core, the friendship paradox is deceptively simple. On average, your friends are likely to have more friends than you do. At first, this seems counterintuitive, even a little unsettling. How could that possibly be true? Are you less connected, less valued, or somehow missing out on something fundamental? To understand why this happens, let's step into the world of networks. Not the digital kind on your phone, but the intricate web of human connections that links us all together. Imagine a small community. Some people are introverts with just a few close friends, while others are social butterflies, connected to dozens or even hundreds of people. In this network, the individuals with the most connections naturally appear in more people's friend circles. If you randomly pick one of your friends, there is a higher chance they'll be one of the highly connected individuals simply because they have so many ties. This statistical bias skews our perception. When we look outward, we're often looking at those who are disproportionately connected, which makes it seem like they're more popular on average. Here is an analogy. Picture a library where some books are checked out often and others rarely leave the shelves. If you walk around asking people which books they borrowed, you're more likely to hear about the popular titles. Similarly, in your social network, the people you see most often and interact with most frequently are often those who are better connected. This is the math behind the paradox, a subtle distortion baked into the very structure of human relationships. But the friendship paradox isn't just a quirk of statistics. It has profound psychological and emotional implications, especially in today's world of curated online lives. Social media amplifies this effect dramatically. Platforms like Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok are designed to highlight the most visible and connected people. You see glamorous vacations, joyful gatherings, career successes, and endless streams of interactions. The result? A persistent, nagging sense that everyone else is doing more, connecting more, living more. This can lead to what psychologists call social comparison. We measure ourselves against others and often come up short, not because we're lacking, but because our view is skewed. The highly connected friends dominate our feeds, creating the illusion that we're on the outside looking in. It's a fertile ground for anxiety, envy, and even depression. You start to wonder, am I not interesting enough? Am I missing out on something vital? Yet the paradox teaches an important lesson. This perception is largely an illusion. Your friends don't seem more popular because you're less worthy. They seem that way because the structure of networks makes it almost inevitable. Understanding this can be liberating. It's a reminder that what you're seeing is only a small, distorted slice of reality. Interestingly, the friendship paradox has practical applications beyond personal reflection. Public health experts use it to track and combat disease outbreaks. Highly connected individuals are more likely to catch and spread illnesses, so targeting them for interventions, like vaccinations or health messaging, can have an outsized effect. This strategy, derived from the paradox, has been instrumental in controlling epidemics. In the digital realm, the paradox helps us understand how information and misinformation spreads. A meme, a rumor, or a viral video can propagate rapidly because of the hubs in the network, those hyper-connected individuals whose reach extends far and wide. The same principle applies to influence and inequality. In almost any network, social, professional, or digital, a small number of people often hold disproportionate power and visibility. But perhaps the most profound lesson of the friendship paradox isn't about math or sociology. It's about perspective. It has a gentle nudge to question the stories we tell ourselves when we compare our lives to others. Your perception of the world is shaped by who you're connected to, and those connections are rarely distributed evenly. The paradox challenges us to rethink what it means to be popular or successful. True connection isn't measured by numbers. It's not about how many people know your name or how full your calendar is. It's about depth, meaning, and reciprocity. The quiet friend who listens when you need to talk, the companion who shows up in times of crisis, the ones who remember the small details of your life. These are the connections that nourish the soul. No paradox, however clever, can diminish their importance. So the next time you feel that creeping sense of inadequacy, that everyone else is more connected, more admired, more alive, pause and remember the friendship paradox. What you're feeling is not a reflection of your worth. It's a trick of perspective, a statistical quirk magnified by the modern world. And in stepping back, you may find something richer than numbers, the quiet strength of genuine relationships. In the end, the paradox isn't meant to make you feel small. It's meant to remind you that comparison often blinds us to what truly matters. Your life is not a tally of followers or connections. It's a web of meaning woven from the people you care about and who care about you. And in that web, you may find that you are already richer than you think. The tolerance paradox. Can a truly tolerant society remain tolerant if it also tolerates intolerance? It's a question that echoes through the corridors of democracy, philosophy, and ethics. A question that grows louder as the world becomes more connected, more diverse, and more complex. Known as the tolerance paradox, this idea was most famously articulated by philosopher Karl Popper in the mid-20th century. At its heart lies a deep contradiction. The very values that support open, inclusive societies can also leave them vulnerable to being dismantled by the very forces they seek to welcome. Imagine a society built on openness, where all voices are heard, all beliefs are protected, and every person has the right to live and express themselves freely. This is the ideal of tolerance, a world where difference is not merely allowed but embraced. Now imagine within this society arises a group that openly rejects those values. They use their freedom not to coexist, but to spread hatred, exclusion, and authoritarianism. They campaign to silence others, to diminish diversity, to assert dominance. And they do so under the banner of the very freedoms that the tolerant society offers them. Here lies the paradox. If society tolerates this group in the name of freedom, it risks enabling its own destruction. But if society suppresses that group, even to protect its core values, has it already abandoned the very tolerance it claims to uphold? This tension is at the core of the tolerance paradox. It's not just an intellectual puzzle. It's a dilemma that plays out in real-world politics, in debates over free speech, in legal systems, and even in everyday conversations. Karl Popper introduced this concept in The Open Society and Its Enemies, a book written during the rise of fascism and totalitarianism in Europe. He had witnessed how open societies, in their well-meaning efforts to accommodate all views, sometimes failed to protect themselves against those who sought to destroy them from within. His conclusion was both clear and controversial. A tolerant society must be intolerant of intolerance. It must draw a line. But how do we draw that line? Who decides what counts as intolerance? Is every disagreeable opinion dangerous? Should society silence all forms of radical thought, or only those that incite violence and suppress others? These are not easy questions, and they strike at the very heart of democratic principles. Freedom of speech, for example, is often hailed as a cornerstone of modern civilization. But what happens when speech is used to erode the rights of others? When slogans turn into hate? When protests become threats? The tolerance paradox forces us to confront the reality that tolerance cannot be boundless. At some point, it must defend itself or collapse under the weight of its own openness. If a society allows the unchecked rise of ideologies that fundamentally oppose inclusion and coexistence, it may soon find itself governed by those ideologies. History has shown this pattern before, in Germany during the rise of the Nazi regime, in various authoritarian takeovers, and even in smaller, subtler shifts within democratic systems. One of the paradox's strengths is that it doesn't suggest a rigid rulebook. It asks for discernment. It demands that we think carefully about context, intention, and impact. Tolerance, in this light, is not weakness or passivity. It is strength tempered by wisdom. It is the courage to say no when saying yes would enable harm. Let's look at a modern example. On social media, platforms struggle with this paradox daily. Should extremist groups be allowed to spread misinformation or incite hatred in the name of free expression? Or should those platforms intervene, remove content, and risk being accused of censorship? The answer is rarely black and white. But the tolerance paradox provides a moral lens through which we can evaluate such questions. The freedom to speak does not include the freedom to dehumanize others or destroy the very framework that protects that freedom. Critics of Popper's idea often raise concerns about abuse. They ask, what if those in power misuse this concept to silence dissent? What if genuine opposition or criticism is labeled as intolerance simply to stifle debate? These are valid concerns. The paradox doesn't offer easy solutions. It demands constant vigilance, a willingness to hold our values up to scrutiny, and ensure that the line we draw is just, fair, and grounded in the protection of human dignity, not convenience or control. The tolerance paradox also speaks to the psychology of group behavior. Intolerance often thrives on fear, fear of the other, fear of change, fear of losing status or control. When people feel threatened, they may retreat into rigid beliefs, seek scapegoats, or embrace authoritarian ideologies. In such environments, tolerance isn't just a principle, it becomes an active choice, one that requires empathy, education, and at times, intervention. That's why education plays a critical role in maintaining a tolerant society. When people are taught to understand different perspectives, when empathy is fostered and critical thinking encouraged, the seeds of intolerance find less fertile ground. Dialogue becomes possible. Misunderstandings are reduced. And while disagreement is inevitable, it becomes part of a healthy exchange rather than a dangerous divide. Still, education and dialogue are not always enough. There are moments when words escalate into actions, when intolerance becomes aggression, when hate becomes policy, when freedom is weaponized against itself. In these moments, the tolerance paradox becomes a call to action. It asks us, are we willing to protect the values we claim to cherish, even when doing so means confronting those who would abuse those same values? It's worth noting that the paradox doesn't call for preemptive suppression. It does not advocate silencing every unpopular opinion or branding all dissent as danger. Rather, it warns of a tipping point where tolerance without limits becomes complicity. It's a reminder that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of a shared commitment to justice, equity, and mutual respect. The world today offers no shortage of examples where the tolerance paradox is playing out in real time. Debates over hate speech laws, the rise of authoritarian populism, the spread of disinformation, these are not abstract issues. They're battles for the soul of open societies. And in each case, the question looms large. How far can we bend in the name of tolerance before we break? Perhaps the most important lesson the tolerance paradox teaches us is that tolerance is not a passive state. It is an active process, one that requires engagement, boundaries, and responsibility. To be tolerant is not to accept everything. It is to protect the conditions that allow tolerance to flourish. And that sometimes means refusing to tolerate those who seek to tear it all down. In the end, a paradox doesn't weaken the case for tolerance, it strengthens it. It reminds us that the values we hold most dear must be defended not only in words, but in action. True tolerance is not the naive embrace of all things. It is the thoughtful, vigilant stewardship of a society that refuses to be hijacked by hatred. It is the balance between open hands and a firm spine. And in that balance, we find the possibility of a society that can remain both free and fair, not because it tolerates everything, but because it refuses to tolerate the destruction of what matters most. The paradox of choice. Picture this. You walk into an ice cream shop on a hot summer day, ready to treat yourself. But instead of the usual 5 or 6 flavors, you're greeted with 50. Chocolate, vanilla, pistachio, salted caramel, mango sorbet, rocky road, the list seems endless. At first, you feel delighted by the abundance of options. Yet as you stand there, scanning the colorful tubs, a strange sensation creeps in. You're overwhelmed. What if you choose pistachio, but later wish you'd tried the salted caramel? What if rocky road would have been perfect? A simple, joyful decision has now become a stressful ordeal. This is the essence of the paradox of choice, a counterintuitive idea that challenges one of modern society's most cherished beliefs, that more choices lead to greater freedom, and more freedom leads to greater happiness. On the surface, this seems obvious. Freedom and choice are cornerstones of our culture. The ability to select from countless options is often equated with empowerment. But psychologist Barry Schwartz, who popularized the concept, argues that too much choice can paralyze us. Instead of liberating, it can weigh us down. Let's unravel why this happens. Imagine you're trying to pick a movie on a streaming platform. Hundreds of films are at your fingertips, thrillers, comedies, documentaries, classics. You scroll and scroll, hoping to find the perfect one. But after 20 minutes, you're still undecided. Eventually, you settle on an old favorite, not because it's what you wanted most, but because the effort of choosing has left you exhausted. This is what Schwartz calls decision fatigue. The more options we have, the harder it becomes to choose. And the paradox doesn't stop there. Even after we make a decision, we often feel less satisfied with it. That salted caramel ice cream you finally chose? It's delicious. Yet, as you eat it, your mind drifts back to the pistachio. Would I have enjoyed that more? This creeping sense of doubt is called post-decision regret. It's amplified by a psychological phenomenon known as opportunity cost awareness, the nagging realization of what you gave up in choosing one thing over another. The more options there are, the higher our expectations become. If you only have 3 flavors to choose from, you're likely to be happy with whatever you get. But with 50 flavors, you expect something extraordinary, something life-changing. And if the salted caramel doesn't blow your mind, you feel disappointed, not because it's bad, but because it wasn't perfect. This cycle creates an ironic outcome. Abundance breeds dissatisfaction. The very freedom that was supposed to make us happier instead leaves us more anxious, indecisive, and unfulfilled. Interestingly, people respond to this paradox in different ways. Some are maximizers. They strive to make the best possible choice in every situation. Maximizers meticulously research every option, read endless reviews, and compare all possibilities before deciding. While this might sound prudent, it often leads to stress and second-guessing. Even after making a choice, maximizers tend to wonder if they could have done better. Others are satisficers. They aim for good enough. A satisficer doesn't spend hours agonizing over which ice cream flavor is best. They choose quickly and stick with their decision, freeing themselves from the endless loop of what-ifs. Studies suggest that satisficers are often happier and less anxious than maximizers. They understand that perfection is a mirage, and chasing it only leaves you thirsty. The paradox of choice extends far beyond ice cream shops and streaming platforms. It touches every corner of modern life. What career should you pursue? Where should you live? Who should you date? Each question carries countless possibilities. Each possibility carries opportunity costs, and each cost weighs on the mind. In an age of seemingly limitless options, it's easy to feel that no matter what we choose, we're missing out on something better. This is where the concept of FOMO, the fear of missing out, takes root. When you scroll through social media and see others enjoying adventures, careers, or relationships different from your own, you might start to question your own choices. Even if you were once content, the sheer visibility of alternatives makes you restless. Paradoxically, happiness doesn't always come from having more options. It often arises from having fewer. In cultures where choices are limited, whether due to tradition, circumstance, or simplicity, people sometimes report higher satisfaction. Why? Because with fewer options, expectations are lower. Decisions feel lighter. Commitment feels more natural. So how do we navigate the paradox of choice in a world that bombards us with options? One strategy is to embrace the idea of good enough. Instead of endlessly chasing the best choice, aim for one that meets your needs and values. Trust yourself to make it work. Another strategy is to set limits. Instead of scrolling through hundreds of movie titles, decide to choose from the first 5 you see. Or use a randomizer to pick for you, freeing your mind from the burden of endless comparison. Mindfulness can also help. By being fully present with your choice, enjoying the salted caramel without thinking about pistachio, you can find deeper contentment. When you focus on what is rather than what could have been, the noise of alternatives fades. The paradox of choice offers a profound lesson. Freedom isn't about having endless possibilities. It's about having the clarity and confidence to choose, and the wisdom to let go of the rest. True happiness doesn't come from perfect decisions. It comes from embracing imperfection, from finding joy in the paths we walk, rather than longing for the ones we didn't take. So the next time you stand frozen in front of 50 ice cream flavors, or scroll endlessly through streaming platforms, remember this paradox. Sometimes less really is more. And sometimes the key to freedom isn't in expanding your options. It's in appreciating the choice you've already made. The value paradox. Why is water, essential for life, so cheap, while diamonds, which have no real survival value, are so expensive? This puzzling contradiction, known as the value paradox or the diamond water paradox, was first articulated by the father of modern economics, Adam Smith. At first glance, it seems absurd. Water sustains every living being on Earth. Without it, life would wither in days. Diamonds, on the other hand, are luxury items, beautiful, yes, but unnecessary for survival. Yet markets value diamonds far more highly than water. Why? To begin untangling this paradox, imagine yourself in 2 different scenarios. First, you're standing in your kitchen. You turn the faucet, and crystal clear water gushes forth, cold and abundant. It's so common you don't even think about it. Then imagine being lost in the desert, your lips cracked, your throat dry, every cell in your body screaming for hydration. At that moment, you'd trade every diamond in the world for a single glass of water. Here lies the key to understanding the paradox: context. In our day-to-day lives, water is abundant, while diamonds are scarce. But scarcity alone isn't enough to explain the difference in value. To understand why markets place such a high price on something non-essential and such a low price on something vital, we need to explore two concepts: utility and exchange value. Utility refers to how useful something is in satisfying needs or wants. Water has immense utility. It quenches thirst, nourishes crops, cleanses, and sustains life. Diamonds, in contrast, have little practical use beyond their symbolic and industrial functions. But exchange value, the price something commands in a market, is determined not just by utility, but by availability, demand, and perception. Adam Smith recognized this discrepancy, but couldn't fully resolve it. The answer came later with the concept of marginal utility. Marginal utility is the additional satisfaction gained from consuming one more unit of something. Because water is plentiful in most environments, its marginal utility is low. The first few glasses you drink are invaluable, but once your thirst is quenched, additional water brings little extra benefit. Diamonds, being rare, have high marginal utility to those who desire them, driving up their price. This principle explains why luxury items often command staggering prices. It's not about necessity. It's about scarcity and desire. People don't pay for how important something is, in an absolute sense. They pay for how much they value the next unit of it, given their current situation. But the value paradox is more than an economic principle. It's a mirror reflecting human psychology and cultural values. Why do we chase objects like diamonds, designer handbags, or luxury cars? Often, their worth is less about function and more about symbolism. Diamonds, for example, have become icons of love and status. Their value is, in part, a social construct, carefully cultivated by marketing, tradition, and perception. Water, by contrast, is often overlooked precisely because it's abundant. It's a sobering thought. We undervalue what we have in plenty, even when it's essential for life. Only when it's scarce, during a drought, a natural disaster, or in a desert, do we recognize its true worth. This paradox extends beyond economics. It raises profound questions about how we prioritize in our own lives. Do we spend our time and energy chasing rare luxuries while neglecting the simple, essential joys that sustain us? It's a philosophical challenge as much as an economic one. Consider how this dynamic plays out in relationships. In the pursuit of admiration or social status, some people chase connections that sparkle like diamonds, shiny, enviable, but ultimately fragile. Meanwhile, they may overlook the steady, reliable bonds, the water of friendship, that quietly sustain them. The value paradox also has critical implications for global issues. In parts of the world where clean water is scarce, its value skyrockets. Millions of people face water scarcity daily, turning what is cheap and taken for granted in some countries into a precious, life or death resource elsewhere. This stark contrast exposes how fragile our assumptions of abundance can be. In modern economics, supply and demand offer a neat resolution to the paradox. Water is cheap because it's widely available in many regions, while diamonds are expensive due to their scarcity and the difficulty of extraction. But this resolution doesn't diminish the deeper lesson. Our sense of value is shaped by context, culture, and perception as much as by necessity. Scarcity inflates worth, not just in markets, but in minds. It's why people will pay exorbitant amounts for an NFT, a limited edition sneaker, or a concert ticket. Scarcity creates desire, and desire creates value, even when the item in question has little practical utility. Perhaps the greatest insight of the value paradox is this: true worth often hides in plain sight. We may spend our lives striving for things that shimmer like diamonds, while forgetting that the quiet, essential elements, health, nature, companionship, water itself, are priceless. So the next time you turn on a faucet or hold a glass of cool, clean water in your hands, pause. Consider how easy it is to take life's essentials for granted, and ask yourself, are you valuing what truly sustains you, or are you chasing what only sparkles? In the end, the value paradox isn't just an economic curiosity. It's a call to reflect on how we see the world. It invites us to look beyond price tags and status symbols, to rediscover the beauty and necessity of what we often overlook. Because in a universe where water gives life and diamonds merely adorn it, perhaps the greatest riches lie not in what's rare, but in what's essential. The paradox of thrift. Imagine being told that saving your money, something you've always believed to be wise and responsible, could actually harm the economy. At first, this sounds impossible. Isn't thriftiness a virtue? Isn't building financial security something we should all strive for? Yet in the world of economics, there exists a strange contradiction. What is good for an individual may not always be good for society as a whole. This is the paradox of thrift, a concept that flips our understanding of saving and spending on its head, and forces us to rethink the delicate balance between personal prudence and collective prosperity. Let's begin with what seems obvious. Saving money is generally considered a sign of financial health. By setting aside funds, you create a safety net for unexpected expenses and invest in your future. On an individual level, thrift allows you to prepare for emergencies, build wealth, and avoid debt. But what happens when everyone decides to save more at the same time? The effects ripple far beyond personal budgets and begin to shape the economy itself. Picture a small town where every resident suddenly feels anxious about the future. Perhaps they've heard rumors of a coming recession. Families cut back on dining out, shopping for clothes, and taking vacations. Businesses that rely on consumer spending, restaurants, shops, travel agencies, begin to suffer. They see fewer customers, revenue declines, and they're forced to lay off workers or even close entirely. With more people unemployed, there's even less spending in the community. The cycle reinforces itself, dragging the local economy downward. This is the heart of the paradox of thrift. While saving is beneficial for an individual, if everyone saves simultaneously, overall demand in the economy decreases. Businesses have fewer sales, workers lose their jobs, and the economy slows down. Ironically, the very act of saving more, intended to create security, ends up contributing to the instability everyone hoped to avoid. The idea was popularized by British economist John Maynard Keynes during the Great Depression. Keynes observed that in times of economic downturn, the collective urge to save worsened the crisis. When demand falls, businesses produce less, jobs are cut, and incomes decline. As people's fears grow, they save even more, further reducing demand. The result is a vicious cycle of contraction. Keynes argued that in such situations, what the economy needs isn't more saving, it's more spending to stimulate growth. This doesn't mean saving is bad. In a healthy economy, savings provide the capital for investments, funding businesses, innovation, and infrastructure. But during recessions, when spending is already weak, a surge in saving can be counterproductive. The paradox lies in the timing. An act that is virtuous in one context can be harmful in another. The paradox of thrift also raises questions about the role of government in managing the economy. If individuals and businesses are cutting back, who can step in to keep demand alive? Keynes proposed that governments should fill this gap through public spending on projects like infrastructure, education, and healthcare. By injecting money into the economy, governments can create jobs, stimulate demand, and kickstart growth. This approach, known as Keynesian economics, has shaped the policies of many nations during times of crisis. But not everyone agrees. Critics argue that encouraging spending during downturns leads to excessive debt and delays the pain of necessary adjustments. Others believe that saving, even in tough times, is ultimately beneficial because it provides funds for future investment. These debates highlight a central tension in economics: the balance between short-term fixes and long-term stability. Beyond economics, the paradox of thrift has a psychological dimension. In uncertain times, fear drives people to save more, creating a self-reinforcing cycle. Consumer confidence plays a critical role in economic health. When people feel optimistic about the future, they spend more, fueling growth. When fear dominates, even those who can afford to spend hold back, contributing to the very downturn they dread. Consider how this plays out in your own life. Imagine you're worried about a possible job loss. You cancel plans to renovate your kitchen, avoid going out to eat, and postpone a family vacation. These decisions make sense individually. They protect your finances. But when multiplied across millions of households, they shrink demand in the economy, which might make job losses more likely. This paradox also highlights the interconnectedness of economic systems. No one acts in isolation. Your choices affect others, just as their choices affect you. A thriving economy depends not only on what we do for ourselves, but also on how we contribute to the broader system. So how do we navigate the paradox of thrift? On a personal level, it is important to strike a balance between saving for the future and participating in the present economy. On a societal level, policies and safety nets can help smooth out the extremes of boom and bust cycles. Programs like unemployment insurance, stimulus payments, and public works projects are designed to keep money circulating when private spending slows. The paradox teaches us that economics isn't just about numbers. It's about human behavior, confidence, and values. It challenges the notion that personal responsibility alone can ensure stability. In reality, we're all part of a larger story, where our decisions ripple outward in ways we don't always see. Perhaps the greatest lesson of the paradox of thrift is this: prosperity isn't built by individuals acting in isolation, but by communities moving together. Saving is essential, but so is spending, investment, and trust in the future. A healthy economy requires all these elements in harmony. So the next time you consider tightening your belt, remember the paradox. Your choices matter, not just for your bank account, but for the fabric of society itself. And in that delicate balance between personal prudence and collective well-being lies the secret to a stable and flourishing economy. The stability-instability paradox. Imagine living in a world where the more secure and stable things appear on the surface, the greater the risk of hidden dangers lurking beneath. It seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? Yet this is the essence of the stability-instability paradox, a concept that emerged from political science and international relations, revealing how efforts to maintain peace and balance can paradoxically create the conditions for conflict. It is a reminder that stability is not always what it seems, and that the quest for security can have unexpected consequences. This paradox was most famously observed during the Cold War, a tense era defined by two nuclear superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. Each possessed enough weapons to destroy the other, and indeed, the entire planet, many times over. This mutual capacity for total annihilation created what seemed like an ironic form of peace. Neither side dared launch a full-scale war, knowing it would trigger a chain reaction leading to the end of civilization. But here's where the paradox takes shape. While nuclear weapons stabilized relations at the global level by preventing direct conflict between superpowers, they made smaller, localized wars more likely. Why? Because both sides, secure in the knowledge that neither would escalate to nuclear war, felt emboldened to engage in proxy conflicts, supporting opposing factions in Vietnam, Korea, Afghanistan, and elsewhere. The very stability created by nuclear deterrence paradoxically made space for instability at lower levels. At its core, the stability-instability paradox is about incentives. When stability is maintained at the highest level through a balance of power or fear of escalation, actors may feel freer to take risks in smaller arenas. They calculate that their actions won't trigger the catastrophic response they fear most. In this way, stability at one level creates instability at another. But this paradox isn't confined to Cold War history. It has profound implications for modern geopolitics. Consider the relationship between nuclear-armed neighbors like India and Pakistan. While the presence of nuclear weapons may reduce the likelihood of a full-scale war, it doesn't prevent skirmishes, border disputes, or terrorist attacks. Each side assumes that the other will avoid escalation, making limited aggression seem safe. The same dynamic applies in cybersecurity. As nations and corporations build stronger defenses to protect their digital systems, they inadvertently escalate an arms race with hackers and cybercriminals. The more robust the security, the more sophisticated the attacks become. A sense of safety at the systemic level creates instability at the tactical level. In economics, a similar phenomenon occurs. Governments often implement policies to stabilize markets, like bailouts or regulations. While these measures can prevent catastrophic crashes, they sometimes create a sense of security that encourages reckless behavior. Investors, believing they'll be protected from worst-case scenarios, may take greater risks. This can lead to localized financial bubbles or crises, even as the broader system appears stable. The stability-instability paradox raises challenging questions about the nature of security. How do we balance efforts to maintain peace with the unintended consequences of those efforts? Is it possible to create a system that is both secure and flexible without encouraging the very instability we hope to avoid? These questions have no easy answers, but they highlight the importance of thinking critically about complex systems. Actions intended to solve one problem often create new ones. The ripple effects can be difficult to predict, and sometimes the cure introduces side effects as dangerous as the disease. One of the most profound lessons of the paradox is the need for humility in decision-making. Whether in international relations, technology, or finance, we must recognize that no system is perfectly stable. The appearance of balance is often an illusion, masking underlying tensions that could erupt under the right conditions. This is where communication and trust become vital. In geopolitics, transparency and dialogue can help prevent miscalculations. When actors understand each other's intentions and capabilities, they're less likely to stumble into conflicts that could spiral out of control. In cybersecurity and economics, collaboration and shared standards can mitigate the risks of instability. Yet the paradox also reminds us that true security requires more than deterrence. It requires adaptability and a willingness to engage with uncertainty. Stability is not a static achievement, but a dynamic process, a delicate balance that must be continually maintained. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the stability-instability paradox is its persistence. As long as there are imbalances of power or competing interests, the dynamics it describes will continue to shape our world. Peace is fragile and often paradoxical in nature. It is not merely the absence of conflict, but a living equilibrium that can tip into chaos if pushed too far. So what can we learn from this paradox? First, it teaches us to question the assumption that stability is always a good thing. While it can reduce the likelihood of large-scale disasters, it can also create blind spots where smaller-scale conflicts take root. Second, it challenges us to think critically about the unintended consequences of our actions, particularly in complex, interconnected systems. In the end, the stability-instability paradox isn't just a concept for scholars and policymakers. It's a lens for understanding human behavior, relationships, and organizations. Even in personal life, a similar dynamic can appear. Sometimes, the more we try to control every detail, the more unexpected disruptions arise. Flexibility, communication, and awareness of complexity can help us navigate these tensions. This paradox reminds us that the pursuit of stability is not about creating a world without conflict or uncertainty. It's about learning to manage and adapt to them. True security lies not in rigid defenses, but in resilience, the ability to bend without breaking, to adjust without losing balance. And perhaps that's the paradox's greatest lesson. Stability is not an endpoint, but a journey. It requires constant reflection, humility, and care. In a world where peace and chaos are never far apart, our challenge is not to eliminate instability, but to understand and work with it, embracing the dynamic nature of life itself. The hedonism paradox. What if the harder you chase happiness, the further away it gets? It's a thought that seems counterintuitive, even cruel. After all, isn't the pursuit of pleasure and joy the very essence of life? We fill our days with activities, relationships, and ambitions, all in search of that elusive feeling of satisfaction. Yet the hedonism paradox suggests that the more we focus on happiness as a goal, the more it slips through our fingers. Like trying to hold water in your hands, the tighter you grasp, the faster it escapes. At the heart of this paradox is the ancient idea of hedonism, the belief that pleasure is the highest good, the ultimate aim of human existence. On the surface, this philosophy feels logical and intuitive. Who doesn't want to be happy? Whether it's savoring a delicious meal, laughing with friends, or standing in awe of a breathtaking sunset, moments of pleasure give life its sweetness. But when we make pleasure the sole focus of our lives, we often find that it becomes strangely elusive. Imagine you're at a party. You've dressed up, planned every detail, and told yourself you're going to have the best time ever. Yet as the evening unfolds, you keep checking in with yourself. Am I having fun? Is this as good as I hoped? Am I enjoying this as much as everyone else? The more you analyze, the less immersed you feel. Instead of joy, you're left with restlessness and doubt. This is the hedonism paradox in action. The paradox arises because happiness is often a byproduct, not a direct outcome. When we make it our goal, we become self-conscious, constantly measuring and evaluating our feelings. This self-monitoring creates pressure and anxiety, pulling us out of the moment and making genuine joy harder to experience. Psychologists call this the paradoxical effect, the idea that focusing too intensely on a desired state can make it harder to achieve. Consider sleep. If you lie in bed thinking, "I must fall asleep now," the very effort keeps you awake. Happiness behaves in much the same way. When pursued directly, it becomes a moving target. This insight is not new. Philosophers, poets, and thinkers throughout history have recognized the paradox. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, wrote, "Happiness cannot be pursued, it must ensue." For Frankl, joy arises naturally from living a life of meaning and purpose, not from chasing pleasure itself. When we turn our focus outward to relationships, creativity, and causes greater than ourselves, happiness often follows as an unexpected gift. Modern research in positive psychology supports this idea. Studies show that people who prioritize intrinsic goals, like personal growth, deep relationships, and contributing to their communities, tend to report higher life satisfaction than those who focus on extrinsic goals like wealth, status, or physical attractiveness. When we chase external markers of happiness, we often end up feeling hollow because these achievements fail to nourish the deeper parts of our being. But the hedonism paradox doesn't mean pleasure is bad or that we should avoid joyful experiences. On the contrary, it reminds us that pleasure is most profound when it arises naturally. Think of a hobby you love: painting, hiking, playing music. When you're fully engaged, you lose track of time. You're not thinking about whether you're happy. You're simply absorbed in the act. Paradoxically, this lack of focus on happiness allows deeper joy to bloom. In modern society, the paradox is amplified by consumerism and social media. We're bombarded with messages telling us that happiness lies in the next purchase, the next vacation, the next achievement. Advertisements promise bliss if only we buy this product or adopt that lifestyle. Social media feeds flood us with curated images of other people's joyful moments, creating the illusion that happiness is something constant, something everyone else has mastered. This constant barrage fuels a sense of inadequacy and FOMO, fear of missing out. The more we compare our lives to these polished snapshots, the more we feel pressure to manufacture happiness. And the more we pressure ourselves, the more it slips away. So how can we escape the trap of the hedonism paradox? One approach is to shift our focus from pleasure to meaning. Ask yourself, what gives my life purpose? What activities or relationships make me feel alive, even if they're challenging or uncomfortable? Meaning often requires effort and sacrifice, but it provides a foundation for lasting joy. Another strategy is to cultivate mindfulness, the practice of being fully present in the moment. When we stop analyzing our feelings and simply experience life as it unfolds, we create space for authentic pleasure to arise. Instead of asking, "Am I happy?" we immerse ourselves in what we're doing. And in that immersion, happiness often sneaks up on us. The paradox also invites us to embrace the full spectrum of human emotions. Happiness is not a permanent state. It ebbs and flows like the tide. Trying to maintain it constantly is like trying to hold back the ocean. By accepting sadness, frustration, and uncertainty as natural parts of life, we paradoxically make room for more peace and contentment. Think of happiness not as a trophy to win, but as a garden to tend. You don't pull at the flowers to make them grow faster. Instead, you nurture the soil, provide water and sunlight, and trust that growth will happen in its own time. In the end, the hedonism paradox isn't a warning to stop seeking pleasure. It's an invitation to approach life differently. When we stop obsessing over happiness and focus on living fully, engaging deeply, loving generously, and contributing meaningfully, joy often finds us when we least expect it. So the next time you feel the pressure to be happy, pause, let go of the chase, breathe into the moment. And remember, sometimes happiness isn't found by running toward it, but by slowing down enough to let it catch up to you. The Sorites paradox. If you take a single grain of sand, it's clearly not a heap. Add another grain, and still it isn't a heap. Add a third, a fourth, a fifth. At what point does it become a heap? Is there a precise moment when the collection of grains transforms into something we can definitively call a pile of sand? Or consider the opposite. If you start with a large heap and remove one grain at a time, when does it cease to be a heap? This ancient puzzle, known as the Sorites paradox, comes from the Greek word Sorites, meaning heap. It exposes a peculiar problem in our thinking: how we handle vague concepts and the blurry boundaries of language. It's deceptively simple, yet it touches on profound questions about logic, identity, and the way we define the world. At first glance, the paradox seems like a playful riddle, something to casually ponder. But as you think about it more deeply, it becomes unsettling. Our everyday concepts, heap, bald, tall, old, rich, don't seem to have sharp edges. How many hairs must a man lose before we call him bald? How much money must someone have to be rich? Where do we draw the line? The Sorites paradox challenges us because it reveals a conflict between two intuitions. On one hand, we want to say that small, incremental changes don't make a big difference. Removing a single grain of sand doesn't destroy a heap. But if we apply this logic repeatedly, grain after grain, we're forced to accept that even when no grains are left, it's still a heap, a conclusion that's clearly absurd. Philosophers and logicians have struggled for centuries to resolve this tension. Some suggest that our language is simply imprecise. Words like heap are inherently vague, and their meanings depend on context rather than strict definitions. Others propose more radical solutions, such as rejecting the principle of bivalence, the idea that every statement must be either true or false. Maybe there's a gray zone where a statement is neither fully true nor fully false. This idea leads us to fuzzy logic, a system in which truth comes in degrees rather than absolutes. In fuzzy logic, the statement, "This is a heap," might be 70% true when there are 100 grains of sand, 90% true with 200 grains, and 0% true with only 1 grain. It's a way of modeling the gradual transitions that are so common in the real world. But even fuzzy logic doesn't fully dissolve the paradox. It merely shifts the problem. At what point does a 70% heap become an 80% heap? Are we just creating new boundaries to debate? The Sorites paradox is more than a linguistic curiosity. It has practical implications. Consider legal systems. When is someone considered an adult? At 18? 21? The choice is arbitrary, yet laws require clear thresholds. Or think about environmental policy. When does deforestation become too much deforestation? How many species must vanish before we declare an ecosystem collapsed? This problem also haunts personal identity. Imagine a ship whose planks are replaced one by one. After all the original planks are replaced, is it still the same ship? This variation of the paradox, known as the ship of Theseus, forces us to confront the nature of identity and persistence over time. Are we the same person we were 10 years ago, given that our cells, memories, and experiences have all changed? The Sorites paradox even appears in ethics. If you donate $1 to charity, it won't change the world. Does that mean you shouldn't bother? What about $10, $100? If a single action seems insignificant, how do we recognize the cumulative power of small acts? There's also a psychological layer to this paradox. Human beings are wired to notice big changes, but we often overlook small ones. This makes us vulnerable to slippery slopes. We tolerate minor injustices, slight losses of freedom, tiny shifts in climate, until one day we realize the world has changed dramatically while we weren't paying attention. So how do we live with the Sorites paradox? One response is humility. It reminds us that our concepts and categories are tools, not absolute truths. Language helps us navigate the world, but it's not perfectly suited to capture its complexity. By acknowledging the fuzziness of our definitions, we become more adaptable, less rigid in our thinking. Another response is mindfulness. The paradox shows us that small, incremental changes matter. Whether you're building good habits or dismantling bad ones, each tiny action contributes to a larger whole. A single grain of sand may not make a heap, but enough of them together create a desert. Perhaps this is the paradox's most profound lesson. The world is not built from absolutes, but from gradual transitions. Life's boundaries are soft, its changes subtle. And in those subtle shifts lies the power to transform, to grow, and to decay. So the next time you find yourself debating whether something counts, whether it's a heap, a habit, or a meaningful gesture, remember the Sorites paradox. It's a reminder that in a world of gradual change, every grain matters. The bootstrap paradox. Imagine you're an aspiring writer, struggling to finish your first novel. One day, a mysterious package arrives at your door. Inside is a manuscript, a complete book, word for word identical to the story you've been trying to write. Inspired, you submit it to a publisher under your name, and it becomes a bestseller. Years later, after a successful career, you decide to send a copy of the book back in time to your younger self. The same book that started your journey. Where, then, did the book originally come from? This is the essence of the bootstrap paradox, a time travel conundrum that leaves your mind spinning in circles. It asks a deceptively simple question. If an object, idea, or piece of information is passed from the future to the past and then loops back to the future, what is its true origin? Who or what created it in the first place? The paradox is named after the expression, pulling oneself up by their bootstraps, an impossible feat meant to describe a self-causing loop. In science fiction, it's a favorite trope. A character travels through time and brings back an invention, idea, or object that ultimately causes its own existence in the first place. The result is a causality loop where the origin of the item is impossible to pinpoint. One famous example is found in music. Suppose a man travels back in time with a copy of Beethoven's symphonies. He gives them to a young Beethoven, who grows up to compose the symphonies based on the ones he was given. But who actually wrote the music? Did Beethoven create it, or did it emerge from the time loop itself? At first glance, the bootstrap paradox feels like a playful brain teaser, something to amuse sci-fi fans and philosophers. But when you look closer, it strikes at the very heart of how we understand time, causality, and existence. In our everyday experience, events follow a clear sequence. Cause leads to effect, and the past shapes the future. But in the paradox's closed loop, this chain is broken. Cause and effect feed into each other endlessly. There's no clear beginning, no first mover to set the cycle in motion. The object or idea seems to exist without origin, as if conjured from nothing. This defies our intuition about the universe. Philosophers and physicists alike struggle with it, because it challenges the principle of causality, the idea that every effect must have a cause. If something exists without cause, does it violate the laws of physics? Or does it reveal something deeper about the nature of time? Some theories suggest the loop is consistent with physics. In Einstein's theory of general relativity, space-time can be curved and twisted in ways that permit closed time-like curves, paths that loop back on themselves. If time travel were possible, the bootstrap loop might not break any laws. Instead, it would form a self-consistent timeline. Events in the future influence the past, but in such a way that they don't create contradictions. This idea is captured in the Novikov's self-consistency principle, which proposes that any actions taken by a time traveler were always part of history, and can't alter it in a way that creates paradoxes. In our earlier example, the book exists because it always existed within the loop. There was never an original author. It was bootstrapped into existence. But this raises unsettling questions about creation and originality. If the book has no origin, is it truly created? Or is it an orphaned artifact, existing outside the normal flow of time? Can something with no beginning still have meaning? The bootstrap paradox also invites reflection on human creativity and knowledge. Many ideas feel like they come from nowhere. Flashes of inspiration, sudden breakthroughs, dreams that seem unbidden. Could knowledge itself be a kind of bootstrap loop, passed from one generation to the next, shaped but never fully originating anywhere? In science fiction, the paradox often carries a sense of unease. In the movie Predestination, the main character's entire existence forms a loop, born of time travel, raised by their older self, and destined to repeat the cycle. Such stories raise profound questions about free will. Are we trapped in cycles beyond our control, or do we still have agency, even within the loop? On a practical level, the paradox also has implications for technological progress. Suppose a time traveler brings back a piece of advanced technology. Scientists in the past study it, replicate it, and over centuries refine it. Eventually, the same time traveler discovers the device in their own time and takes it back to the past. Who invented the technology? Does it have an inventor at all? Or is it a gift from the future to itself? This information without origin scenario is deeply unsettling because it suggests the possibility of something existing without a foundation. It challenges our sense of reality, where things arise from causes, not from empty loops. Some philosophers argue that the paradox is logically incoherent, a sign that time travel to the past is impossible. Others suggest it as a quirk of human thinking. Maybe time doesn't work the way we imagine. Perhaps the universe is like a tapestry, where all threads, past, present, and future, are woven together simultaneously. In this view, asking where the loop begins is like asking where a circle starts. The bootstrap paradox may never be resolved fully, but it serves as a powerful metaphor. In life, as in time travel, we often find ourselves caught in loops, patterns of thought, habits, traditions that seem to perpetuate without clear origin. Breaking free requires stepping outside the cycle, questioning assumptions, and daring to imagine new possibilities. Perhaps the most profound lesson of the paradox is this: not every question has a neat answer. Some mysteries, like time itself, resist tidy resolution. But in contemplating them, we expand our sense of wonder, and in that wonder lies the seed of all discovery. The arrow paradox: picture an arrow soaring through the air. It's been fired from a bow with perfect precision, slicing through the sky toward its target. At first glance, everything seems normal. The arrow moves smoothly, cutting through the invisible currents of wind. But ancient Greek philosopher Zeno of Elea asks us to pause and look closer. What happens if we freeze time at a single instant? In that frozen moment, the arrow is motionless, occupying a fixed position in space. If every moment of time is like this, just a series of still frames, then how can motion ever occur? This is the essence of Zeno's arrow paradox, one of several thought experiments he crafted to challenge our understanding of space, time, and movement. It is a puzzle that seems absurd at first, but quickly unfolds into a profound inquiry about the very fabric of reality. Zeno imagined time as being made up of countless indivisible moments. At each instant, the arrow does not move. It simply exists in one place. If all time is composed of such instants, and the arrow is motionless in every one of them, then how does motion emerge? How does a sequence of stillness create the flowing movement we experience? This paradox feels strange because it clashes with our direct experience of the world. We see motion everywhere. Rivers flow, birds fly, people walk. Yet when we analyze movement on the smallest scales, it begins to dissolve into a series of static positions. Zeno's argument forces us to ask, is motion an illusion? In modern terms, Zeno's paradox can be likened to examining a movie reel. A film strip is a collection of still images, each slightly different from the last. When the frames are played in quick succession, they create the illusion of motion. But in any single frame, nothing moves. Does this mean movement is nothing more than a trick of perception? For centuries, Zeno's paradoxes baffled thinkers. Some dismissed them as mere wordplay, while others recognized their power to challenge the foundations of mathematics and physics. Aristotle responded by distinguishing between potential and actual motion. He argued that while the arrow occupies a fixed position at any instant, this doesn't prevent it from moving over time. Motion, he said, is continuous, not a series of static states. Centuries later, the development of calculus by Isaac Newton and Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz provided a mathematical resolution. Calculus allowed scientists to describe change and motion as limits, the sum of infinitely small steps over infinitely small intervals of time. In this framework, the arrow's movement is not paradoxical, but a natural consequence of continuous change. Yet even with calculus, Zeno's paradox continues to intrigue philosophers and physicists. At its core lies a deeper question. Is time truly continuous, or is it made up of discrete units, like the frames of a film? In the quantum realm, where particles behave in strange and unpredictable ways, this question takes on new significance. Some theories suggest that time and space may indeed be granular at the smallest scales, composed of indivisible quanta of spacetime. If this is true, could Zeno's concerns resurface in the foundations of physics? There's also a psychological dimension to the paradox. Human beings perceive motion as smooth and uninterrupted, but our senses are not perfect instruments. The brain stitches together discrete sensory inputs into a coherent picture of the world. Motion, then, may not be as continuous as it feels. Like a film projected onto the screen of our minds, our experience of time could be constructed from a series of still snapshots. The arrow paradox also invites reflection on how we live our lives. We often think of our journey as a continuous flow, moving seamlessly from past to future. But what if we pause and examine a single moment? In that instant, we are neither moving forward nor backward. We simply are. This realization can be liberating. It reminds us that life is not just about reaching a destination, but about inhabiting each moment fully. In meditation practices, there's a focus on stillness and presence, observing the flow of thoughts and sensations without clinging to them. In a way, this echoes Zeno's paradox. Within stillness lies the potential for motion, and within motion lies the reality of stillness. The paradox also resonates with modern technology. Consider digital video games or animations. What appears as smooth movement on the screen is actually a rapid sequence of still images, each displayed for a fraction of a second. The illusion of motion depends on the frame rate. If the frames are too slow, the illusion breaks, and the motion appears jerky or incomplete. Is the universe, too, running on some kind of cosmic frame rate? For many, the arrow paradox is less about finding a definitive answer and more about appreciating the mystery it reveals. It teaches us to question assumptions about reality, to look deeper than our senses, and to embrace the complexity of the world. So the next time you watch an arrow in flight, or a bird gliding, or a car speeding down the road, pause for a moment. Consider the possibility that motion, which seems so simple and obvious, is one of the deepest mysteries of all. And in that pause, you may glimpse the strange beauty of a universe where stillness and movement are inseparable, each giving rise to the other. The grandfather paradox. Imagine you've just stepped into a time machine. Its humming gears and glowing dials promise you access to any point in history. Out of curiosity, or perhaps revenge, you decide to travel back several decades to a time before your parents were born. There, you find your grandfather as a young man, living an ordinary life, unaware of the future that lies ahead. You pull out a weapon, and driven by some dark impulse, you kill him. At first, it seems straightforward. Your grandfather is dead before he has any children. But then, a troubling question arises. If your grandfather never had children, then your parent was never born. And if your parent was never born, then you were never born either. But if you were never born, who traveled back in time to kill your grandfather? This unsettling loop is known as the grandfather paradox. It's one of the most famous and perplexing thought experiments in the philosophy of time travel. At its core lies a deep contradiction. If an event in the past is changed in a way that prevents the time traveler's existence, then the traveler could never have gone back to make the change in the first place. And yet, the event has been changed. The paradox creates a logical impossibility, a closed loop where cause and effect collapse into each other. It raises profound questions about time, causality, and the very nature of reality. On the surface, the grandfather paradox feels like a science fiction plot device, the kind of thing you might encounter in a movie or novel. Indeed, countless stories have explored it in creative and unsettling ways. In Back to the Future, Marty McFly's actions in the past threaten to erase his own existence. In Looper, a man is sent back in time to kill his older self, creating a deadly loop of cause and consequence. But beyond fiction, the paradox forces us to confront real philosophical and scientific dilemmas. Can the past be changed? If so, how do we make sense of causality, the principle that causes come before effects? If altering the past is impossible, does that mean history is fixed and immutable? One possible resolution is the idea of self-consistency. This principle, sometimes called the Novikov self-consistency principle, suggests that time travel to the past might be possible, but any actions taken by the traveler were always part of history. You may think you're altering the past, but in reality, you're fulfilling it. In this view, you couldn't kill your grandfather because something, fate, physics, or sheer luck would always intervene to stop you. Perhaps the gun jams, or you hesitate at the last second. The timeline remains consistent, and paradoxes are avoided. But this solution feels unsatisfying to some. It suggests that time travelers lack free will, that they are bound to act in ways that preserve history, no matter their intentions. Can we really imagine a universe where all events are predestined, and even our attempts to change the past are already written into its fabric? Another possible resolution is the concept of parallel universes, or the many worlds interpretation. In this scenario, when you travel back and kill your grandfather, you don't change your past. Instead, you create a new timeline, branching off from the original. In this new universe, your grandfather is dead, and you are never born. But in your original universe, nothing has changed. Your existence remains intact. This idea offers a tantalizing escape from paradox. It suggests that the universe is not singular, but a vast multiverse, with countless timelines branching and diverging with every choice and action. But it also raises unsettling questions. If time travel creates alternate realities, what happens to the traveler? Are they stranded in a universe where they no longer belong? And what does it mean for identity and continuity of self? The grandfather paradox also touches on deeper metaphysical questions about time itself. Is time linear, flowing like a river from past to future? Or is it more like a landscape where past, present, and future all coexist? If the latter is true, then perhaps the past cannot be changed because it is still there, fixed and unalterable. Interestingly, modern physics has not entirely ruled out time travel. Einstein's theory of general relativity allows for solutions called closed time-like curves, where space-time is warped in such a way that an object could theoretically return to its own past. But whether these solutions describe physical reality or are mere mathematical curiosities is still unknown. On a psychological level, the grandfather paradox resonates because it reflects our own struggles with the past. Who hasn't wondered, if I could go back, what would I change? Would my life and the lives of those around me be better or worse? These questions haunt us precisely because we can't revisit the past. We are bound by the arrow of time, moving ever forward, with only memory and imagination to guide us. Perhaps the paradox's most profound lesson is this: the past shapes us, but it is also beyond our reach. No matter how much we dwell on it, regret it, or long to change it, the past remains what it is. Our true power lies not in rewriting history, but in shaping the present and future. And yet, the grandfather paradox remains a haunting possibility, an open door to the mysteries of time. If we could step through that door, what would we find? Would we discover a universe of rigid determinism, where all events are fixed? Or would we find infinite branching paths, where every choice creates a new world? For now, the paradox sits like a riddle at the heart of our understanding, a reminder that time, the most familiar of all dimensions, may be stranger and more intricate than we can imagine. The twin paradox. Imagine two twins standing together on Earth. They are identical in every way, same age, same memories, same life experiences. Then, one of them steps aboard a spaceship capable of traveling near the speed of light, while the other stays behind on Earth. The traveling twin embarks on a journey across the cosmos, exploring distant stars and planets at incredible speeds. After years of adventure, they return home, eager to reunite. But when they meet again, something astonishing has happened. The twin who stayed on Earth has aged decades, their hair gray and their face lined with the passage of time. The traveling twin, however, appears almost as youthful as the day they left. How can this be? This strange and counterintuitive situation is known as the twin paradox, one of the most famous thought experiments in physics. It emerges from Albert Einstein's theory of relativity and challenges our everyday understanding of time. It suggests that time itself is not absolute but elastic, stretching and contracting, depending on how fast you move through space. At first glance, the paradox seems impossible. Aren't both twins living through the same passage of time? Shouldn't they age equally, regardless of one's journey? To unravel this puzzle, we must leave behind our everyday notions of time and dive into the weird and wonderful world of Einstein's universe. Einstein's special theory of relativity, published in 1905, revolutionized our understanding of space and time. It revealed that as an object approaches the speed of light, time for that object slows down relative to an outside observer. This phenomenon, known as time dilation, means that a clock aboard a high-speed spaceship would tick more slowly than a clock on Earth. In the twin paradox, the traveling twin's entire body, every heartbeat, every thought, every cell, is subject to this slowdown. For them, the journey feels normal. Their internal experience of time is unchanged. But from the perspective of the twin on Earth, their siblings' time is passing at a crawl. This effect is not merely theoretical. It has been confirmed by experiments using highly accurate atomic clocks. When one clock is flown aboard a jet at high speed and then compared to an identical clock left on Earth, the flying clock runs slightly slower. In everyday life, the difference is minuscule, fractions of a second. But at speeds approaching the speed of light, the effect becomes dramatic, leading to the startling age difference between the twins. So where's the paradox? At first, it seems like the situation should be symmetrical. From the traveler's perspective, isn't it the Earth that's moving away at high speed? Shouldn't the Earth twins' clock run slower from their point of view? The key to resolving this lies in acceleration. The traveling twins' journey involves changing direction, first accelerating away from Earth, then turning around, and finally decelerating to return home. These periods of acceleration break the symmetry between the twins. The one who stayed on Earth remained in a single frame of reference, while the traveler switched between frames. This asymmetry explains why the traveler experiences less time. The twin paradox isn't just an intellectual curiosity. It has profound implications for our understanding of reality. Time, it turns out, is not the universal, unchanging backdrop we once imagined. It is intertwined with space, forming a flexible fabric, space-time, that bends and warps in response to motion and gravity. This insight opens the door to astonishing possibilities. In theory, if you could travel fast enough, you could journey across the stars and return to find that centuries have passed on Earth while only a few years have passed for you. The traveler has, in effect, leapt into the future, a one-way ticket forward in time. Yet the paradox also carries an emotional weight. Imagine the loneliness of the traveling twin, returning to a world where everyone they knew has aged, where the places they loved have changed, and where they themselves feel out of sync with time. It's a reminder that time is not just a physical dimension, but a deeply human experience, tied to memory, relationships, and the flow of life. Philosophers have also drawn lessons from the twin paradox. It invites us to reflect on the nature of time itself. Is the flow of time an illusion, as some physicists suggest? Are past, present, and future equally real, existing all at once in a vast, block universe? Or is there something special about the present moment, something that distinguishes it from all others? The paradox also raises questions about aging and immortality. If time can be slowed by speed, could we one day harness this effect to extend human life? Science fiction often imagines spaceships traveling at near light speeds, carrying crews who age slowly as generations pass on Earth. But such journeys would come at a cost, disconnection from everything familiar, a kind of temporal exile. In the end, The twin paradox teaches us that time is far stranger and more malleable than our everyday experience suggests. It challenges us to expand our minds, to imagine realities where clocks tick at different rates, where simultaneity is relative, and where motion itself reshapes the fabric of existence. So the next time you glance at a clock, consider this: that simple ticking hand measures more than you realize. Time is not a universal river flowing at the same rate for everyone. It is a dynamic, elastic thread woven into the vast tapestry of the cosmos. And in that tapestry, every journey, whether across the stars or through the quiet moments of our lives, shapes the way we experience the world. The information paradox. Imagine standing at the edge of a black hole. You've watched countless stars and cosmic debris spiral into its inky darkness, disappearing beyond the event horizon, the point of no return. According to everything we know, whatever crosses that boundary is lost forever. But then you pause and wonder, what happens to all the information about those objects? The mass, energy, and even the intricate details of their composition. Do they simply vanish? This question leads us straight into one of the most profound puzzles in modern physics, the information paradox. It's a contradiction that arises when we try to reconcile two fundamental principles about the universe. On one hand, quantum mechanics insists that information about a physical system cannot be destroyed. On the other, general relativity predicts that anything falling into a black hole is irretrievably lost, leaving no trace. These two truths collide, creating a paradox that has challenged scientists for decades. To understand this mystery, let's start with the basics. Black holes are regions of space-time where gravity is so intense that nothing, not even light, can escape. Once something crosses the event horizon, it's believed to be gone forever. From the perspective of general relativity, all the details about what fell in, whether it was a planet, a star, or your favorite coffee mug, are irrelevant. The black hole retains only three simple characteristics: mass, charge, and angular momentum. Everything else is swallowed and erased. This leads to what physicists call the no-hair theorem. Black holes, it seems, have no hair, no distinguishing features that preserve information about what formed them. But here's where quantum mechanics protests. At its core, quantum theory holds that information is never truly lost. Even when particles interact and systems evolve, the underlying information remains encoded in the universe. If information could vanish into a black hole, it would violate one of quantum theory's most sacred rules, unitarity, the idea that the past can, in principle, always be reconstructed from the present. This clash creates the information paradox. If black holes destroy information, quantum mechanics breaks down. If information is preserved, then general relativity's picture of black holes must be incomplete. Both theories are cornerstones of modern physics, yet here they seem to contradict each other. The paradox became even more intriguing in the 1970s, when Stephen Hawking made a startling discovery. Black holes aren't entirely black. They emit radiation, now known as Hawking radiation, due to quantum effects near the event horizon. Over immense spans of time, this radiation causes black holes to shrink and eventually evaporate. At first, this seemed like a breakthrough. Perhaps the information isn't lost, it escapes with the radiation. But Hawking's calculations showed that this radiation is completely random. It carries no imprint of what fell into the black hole. When the black hole evaporates, all the information appears to vanish with it. If this is true, it has staggering implications. It suggests the universe could allow for irreversible destruction of information. In quantum theory, this would be akin to tearing pages out of the cosmic ledger and burning them to ash. It would undermine the predictability and coherence of the laws of physics. Yet many physicists refuse to accept this outcome. They believe the paradox must have a resolution, one that preserves both quantum mechanics and general relativity. Over the years, numerous proposals have emerged. One idea is the holographic principle, inspired by string theory and the physics of black holes. This principle suggests that all the information about a three-dimensional region of space can be encoded on its two-dimensional boundary, like a hologram. Applied to black holes, it implies that the information about what falls in isn't destroyed. It's smeared across the event horizon, subtly encoded in its quantum structure. As the black hole radiates and shrinks, this information might somehow be released. Another proposal is black hole complementarity, which suggests that information is both reflected at the event horizon and passes through it, depending on the observer's perspective. To an outside observer, information never actually crosses the horizon. To an infalling observer, it does. Both viewpoints are valid, but they cannot be compared directly. More recently, the idea of firewalls has sparked debate. Some physicists argue that, to preserve information, the event horizon isn't smooth as general relativity predicts. Instead, it's a searing wall of energy that destroys anything attempting to cross. This radical suggestion challenges our understanding of black holes and the nature of spacetime itself. Despite decades of work, the information paradox remains unresolved. It stands as a doorway to a deeper theory, one that unites quantum mechanics and general relativity into a single framework, a theory of everything. But beyond physics, the paradox resonates with philosophical questions about memory, loss, and permanence. Is information, like the events of our lives, truly indestructible? Or does the universe allow for oblivion, where details are erased beyond recovery? Perhaps the paradox's greatest lesson is humility. It reminds us that our understanding of the cosmos is incomplete, that even the most brilliant minds can be stumped by nature's mysteries. And in that mystery lies wonder. So the next time you gaze up at the night sky and imagine those invisible giants' black holes spinning silently in the dark, remember the question they whisper: what happens to all we know, all we are, when we cross the edge? The Fermi paradox. On a warm summer afternoon in 1950, the physicist Enrico Fermi sat at a lunch table with his colleagues, discussing the possibilities of life beyond Earth. The conversation turned to flying saucers and interstellar travel, subjects that were more science fiction than science at the time. Suddenly, Fermi asked a simple question that would echo through decades of scientific inquiry. Where is everybody? This question captures the essence of the Fermi paradox, the unsettling contradiction between the high probability of extraterrestrial life in the universe and the lack of any evidence for its existence. The universe is vast, with hundreds of billions of stars in our galaxy alone, many of them older than our sun and likely hosting planets. Given the sheer scale of it all, intelligent life should have arisen many times over. Some civilizations should even have developed advanced technologies capable of traversing the stars. Yet, as far as we can tell, the cosmos remains silent. Why? Where are the alien ships, the radio signals, the cosmic cities glittering across the void? The Fermi paradox asks not just whether we are alone, but why we haven't seen any clear signs of life in a universe that seems so conducive to it. To understand the paradox, let's break it down. The universe is about 13.8 billion years old. Our Milky Way galaxy is roughly 100,000 light years across and contains an estimated 100 to 400 billion stars. Many of these stars have planets in the so-called habitable zone, where conditions might allow liquid water and potentially life to exist. If even a tiny fraction of these planets hosted intelligent life, and if some of those civilizations developed interstellar travel, it seems likely they would have spread across the galaxy by now. In cosmic terms, it wouldn't take that long, perhaps just a few million years, for a determined species to colonize vast stretches of the galaxy. And yet, there's no evidence they exist. No alien probes, no massive spacefaring empires, no faint signals leaking from distant radio transmitters. As far as we know, Earth is the only place where life has arisen, evolved, and begun to peer outward into the stars. So what explains the silence? Scientists and philosophers have proposed many possibilities, each more intriguing and sometimes more unsettling than the last. One possibility is that we are, in fact, alone. Life, despite its tenacity on Earth, may be extraordinarily rare in the universe. Perhaps the conditions that allowed life to emerge here are so improbable that they've then never been replicated anywhere else. In this scenario, Earth is a cosmic oasis, a singular miracle in an otherwise lifeless expanse. Another explanation is that life may be common, but intelligent life is exceedingly rare. Evolution is not a straight path toward intelligence. On Earth, millions of species have thrived for billions of years without developing technology or the ability to communicate across space. Intelligence may be an evolutionary fluke, a rare adaptation that happens only under specific, unlikely circumstances. There's also the possibility of self-destruction. Perhaps intelligent civilizations inevitably destroy themselves before they can explore the stars. Nuclear war, environmental collapse, runaway artificial intelligence. These are just a few of the existential threats that might snuff out young civilizations. In this view, the universe could be littered with the ruins of once promising species, all extinguished before they could reach out to one another. This idea ties into the concept of the Great Filter. The Great Filter is a hypothetical barrier that prevents life from progressing beyond a certain point. It could lie behind us. Perhaps the emergence of life itself is the filter, and we've already passed the hardest hurdle. Or it could lie ahead, suggesting that advanced civilizations are doomed to fail. If the latter is true, it raises a chilling question. Is humanity approaching its own Great Filter? Alternatively, alien civilizations might exist, but are simply too far away. The speed of light imposes a cosmic speed limit, making communication and travel across vast interstellar distances incredibly challenging. Signals could take thousands, even millions, of years to reach us. By the time they do, the civilization that sent them might have long since disappeared. Some theorists propose that aliens are out there, but are deliberately avoiding us. This idea is known as the zoo hypothesis. Advanced civilizations might observe Earth like we observe animals in a wildlife reserve, careful not to interfere or reveal themselves. Perhaps they're waiting for humanity to reach a certain level of development before making contact. Or maybe they decided we're not ready. There's also the unsettling possibility that alien life is hostile or indifferent, and that civilizations which reveal their presence are quickly eliminated. This idea, often referred to as the dark forest hypothesis, suggests the universe is a dangerous place. In a cosmic dark forest, every civilization is a hunter, moving silently to avoid detection, lest it be destroyed by others. Yet another possibility is that we're simply not listening properly. Our search for extraterrestrial life relies on assumptions about how aliens might communicate or what technological signatures they might leave behind. But what if their methods are so advanced or so alien that we wouldn't recognize them even if they were right in front of us? The Fermi paradox isn't just a scientific puzzle. It's a mirror reflecting our hopes, fears, and expectations about life, intelligence, and our place in the cosmos. It challenges us to think deeply about existence. Are we an anomaly or part of a vast, unseen community? If we are alone, then the responsibility is immense. We are the universe's only known witnesses to its grandeur, the sole custodians of life and consciousness. If we are not alone, then we must prepare for the possibility, both thrilling and terrifying, of meeting our cosmic neighbors. Perhaps one day we will find an answer, a faint signal from a distant star, a fossil on Mars, a probe drifting silently into our solar system. Or perhaps the universe will remain silent, leaving us to wonder forever. For now, the Fermi paradox invites us to look up at the night sky and ask, are we alone? Or is the silence just the pause before a reply? The omnipotence paradox Can an all-powerful being create a rock so heavy that even it cannot lift it? At first glance, this question seems almost childish, a clever little riddle designed to stump the listener. But when you dig deeper, you'll find that it carries profound implications about the nature of power, logic, and even the limits of reality itself. This is the omnipotence paradox, a thought experiment that challenges our understanding of unlimited power. It asks whether the very concept of omnipotence can exist without collapsing into contradiction. If a being can create such a rock, it appears there's something it cannot do: lift the rock. But if it cannot create the rock, then there's something it cannot do as well. Either way, the notion of being all-powerful seems to unravel. The paradox has been debated by philosophers, theologians, and thinkers for centuries. It strikes at the heart of discussions about divine attributes, especially in traditions that describe God as omnipotent. Can even God be bound by logic? Or does true omnipotence include the ability to do the logically impossible? Some argue that the paradox is nothing more than a linguistic trick, a misuse of language. They point out that certain statements, while grammatically correct, are nonsensical when examined closely. For instance, asking for a square circle or a married bachelor involves contradictory concepts. In the same way, asking for a rock so heavy that an all-powerful being cannot lift it might simply be an incoherent request, not a genuine limitation on power. This perspective suggests that omnipotence does not include the ability to do the logically impossible. A being can be all-powerful without being able to create contradictions, because contradictions aren't things that can be done. They're errors in reasoning. But others push back. If we begin setting boundaries, declaring some actions beyond even an all-powerful being, are we not chipping away at the very idea of omnipotence? True unlimited power, they argue, should mean the ability to transcend all limitations, including those imposed by logic. This leads us into deep and unsettling territory. Can logic itself be broken? Could there exist a realm where contradictions are possible, where square circles and unliftable rocks coexist? Or is logic not just a tool of human thought, but an immutable feature of reality? Some theologians, like Thomas Aquinas, offered a nuanced view. Aquinas argued that omnipotence means the ability to do all things that are possible, but possible does not include logical contradictions. For Aquinas, the failure to create an unliftable rock is not a lack of power. It's the recognition that such a task is inherently meaningless. Modern philosophers sometimes reframe the paradox in terms of self-limitation. Can an all-powerful being limit its own power? Could it choose to give up its omnipotence, becoming finite? If so, does that mean it was never truly omnipotent to begin with? Or does the ability to self-limit count as the ultimate expression of power? This question isn't just abstract. It has profound implications for how we think about free will, creation, and even human experience. In some religious traditions, God is said to have voluntarily limited his own power to allow for genuine human freedom. In this view, self-limitation is not weakness, but an act of supreme strength and love. The omnipotence paradox also resonates outside of theology. It invites us to reflect on the nature of power in any context: political, technological, personal. Absolute power often seems like an ideal, but in reality, power without limits can be destructive, chaotic, and even self-defeating. True strength may lie not in doing everything, but in knowing when and how to act within constraints. In literature and storytelling, the paradox often appears as a moral lesson. Consider superheroes with godlike abilities, figures like Superman or Dr. Manhattan. They struggle not because they lack power, but because they wrestle with the limits of meaning, responsibility, and choice. What does it mean to act in a world where you can do anything? Can purpose survive in the absence of limitation? At its deepest level, the paradox invites us to consider whether the very idea of absolute power is coherent. Perhaps existence itself is defined by balance, light and dark, creation and destruction, action and restraint. To imagine a power that transcends all balance is to imagine something beyond reality as we know it. Some thinkers suggest that the paradox teaches humility. Whether or not we believe in an omnipotent being, the thought experiment reminds us of the limits of our own understanding. Not every question has an answer that fits neatly into our frameworks. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved, but to be contemplated. In the end, the omnipotence paradox doesn't so much disprove the idea of omnipotence as it reframes it. Perhaps true omnipotence is not the ability to do the absurd, but the power to create and sustain a universe where meaning, order, and beauty can arise. So the next time you ponder the nature of power, whether in gods, leaders, or yourself, consider this. Strength is not always about breaking boundaries. Sometimes it's about honoring them. And in that quiet recognition, we may glimpse a deeper kind of wisdom. The barber paradox. In a quiet little village, there lives a barber who has a very peculiar rule. He shaves every man in town who does not shave himself, and only those men. At first, it seems like a neat system, simple, efficient, and easy to follow. But then comes the question that unravels everything. Who shaves the barber? If the barber shaves himself, then by the rule, he cannot shave himself because he only shaves those who do not shave themselves. But if he does not shave himself, then, according to the rule, he must shave himself. Either way, the situation leads to a logical contradiction. This is the barber paradox, a thought experiment introduced by the British mathematician and philosopher Bertrand Russell in the early 20th century. It's not just a quirky riddle. It's a profound puzzle about self-reference, logic, and the limitations of our conceptual systems. At its heart, the paradox reveals how certain kinds of rules or definitions can collapse when they try to include themselves in their own scope. The barber's rule works fine for everyone else in the village, but the moment we apply it to the barber himself, the system breaks. The barber paradox is a more approachable version of a deeper problem in mathematics and philosophy known as Russell's paradox. Russell discovered that some seemingly reasonable definitions lead to contradictions when applied to themselves. For example, consider the set of all sets that do not contain themselves. Does this set contain itself? If it does, then by definition, it should not contain itself. But if it does not, then it should contain itself. Like the barber, we are caught in a loop of contradiction. This paradox shook the foundations of mathematics at the time. Early mathematicians and logicians believed they could build all of mathematics on a solid foundation of set theory, an elegant system where everything could be defined in terms of sets. But Russell's discovery showed that naive set theory was inconsistent. It allowed the creation of sets that led to contradictions, threatening the very structure of mathematics. To resolve this, mathematicians developed more sophisticated systems of logic, like type theory and Zermelo-Fraenkel set theory, which introduced rules to prevent these kinds of paradoxes. In essence, they created hierarchies that separated sets from sets of sets, and so on, preventing self-reference from spiraling into contradiction. But beyond mathematics, the barber paradox invites us to reflect on self-reference in many areas of life. Consider language. The sentence, "This statement is false," creates the same kind of loop. If the statement is true, then it must be false. But if it's false, then it must be true. This is known as the liar paradox, and it's a linguistic cousin to the barber's dilemma. In computer science, self-reference appears in programs that try to analyze themselves. The famous halting problem, introduced by Alan Turing, asks whether it is possible to create an algorithm that can determine whether any given program will eventually stop running or continue forever. Turing proved that no such universal algorithm exists. The problem, like the barber's rule, runs into contradictions when applied to itself. Even in everyday life, we encounter echoes of the paradox. Think of rules or systems that attempt to govern themselves. Can a law-making body create laws that limit its own power? Can an authority oversee itself without contradiction? These questions highlight the challenges of self-regulation and the need for external checks and balances. The barber paradox also touches on the human experience of self-awareness. When we reflect on our own thoughts, we create a loop of self-reference. The mind thinking about itself is a fascinating and mysterious process, one that philosophers, psychologists, and neuroscientists still struggle to fully understand. But perhaps the most valuable lesson of the paradox lies in humility. It reminds us that not every system can be perfectly consistent, that some questions resist neat answers. The world is full of complexities and contradictions, and sometimes the act of trying to capture them in a simple rule or definition exposes the limits of our reasoning. In the village of the barber, there may never be a satisfying resolution to the question of who shaves him. But maybe that's the point. The paradox is not a problem to be solved, but a doorway to deeper reflection about logic, systems, and the delicate dance between rules and reality. So the next time you find yourself tangled in a mental loop, trying to reason your way out of a contradiction, remember the barber. Some questions aren't meant to be answered. They're meant to illuminate the boundaries of thought, and in doing so, they teach us to think more carefully about the systems we create and the assumptions we make. The trying not to try paradox. There's a moment we've all felt before, the deep longing to relax, to find stillness, to just let go. But the harder we try to grasp that feeling, the further it drifts away. We lie down, close our eyes, and command ourselves to be calm. We tell our muscles to loosen, our thoughts to quiet, our hearts to slow down. Yet in doing so, we often grow more restless, more agitated, more aware of the tension we were trying to escape. This is the trying not to try paradox, a strange and frustrating truth that the more we try to relax, the less relaxed we feel. Because relaxation, like sleep, happiness, or inspiration, cannot be forced. It arises only when we stop trying to summon it. This paradox is at the heart of many ancient philosophies, especially those from the East. In Taoism, it's known as Wu Wei, the principle of effortless action, or action without striving. It's not about doing nothing, but about flowing with the natural rhythm of things instead of fighting them. A river does not strain to reach the ocean. A tree does not force itself to grow. They simply follow their nature, and in doing so, they achieve incredible things. The more we align with this way of being, the more peace we experience, not through control, but through surrender. But in a modern world built on effort, productivity, and optimization, this approach feels unnatural. We are trained from a young age to try harder, push more, strive endlessly. Relaxation becomes just another goal on the to-do list. We buy products to help us unwind. We schedule time to meditate. We judge ourselves for not being calm enough. Even our attempts to find peace are laced with pressure. And yet, the paradox persists. The more intensely we chase serenity, the more elusive it becomes. To truly relax, we must allow ourselves to stop striving. But that doesn't mean giving up. It means letting go. Letting go of the need to control each moment. Letting go of the expectation that every breath should lead to bliss. Letting go of the idea that stillness is a prize to be earned rather than a space to be entered. True relaxation begins not with effort, but with trust. Trust that your body knows how to rest. Trust that your mind will settle in its own time if you stop trying to force it into silence. This paradox also applies to meditation, one of the most well-known practices for cultivating inner peace. Beginners often sit down expecting to achieve instant calm, only to find themselves bombarded with thoughts and distractions. They grow frustrated, thinking they're doing it wrong. But experienced meditators know the secret. There is no such thing as doing it right. The moment you try to force a quiet mind, you agitate it. A mind quiets only when you observe it without judgment. When you allow thoughts to rise and fall, like waves in the ocean, without clinging or pushing them away, something shifts. Not because you tried harder, but because you stopped trying at all. In this way, the trying not to try paradox teaches us a profound lesson about control. Much of what we seek, peace, joy, creativity, even love, cannot be seized through willpower. They arise naturally when we create the space for them, when we stop interfering. Trying to relax is like trying to fall asleep. The more you watch the clock and think, "I must sleep now," the more elusive sleep becomes. But when you simply lie there, letting your body soften, your breathing slow, and your mind drift, sleep often arrives on its own. There's a beautiful irony in this. So much of what makes life meaningful happens when we're not trying to make it happen. The best conversations flow effortlessly. The most memorable moments are often unplanned. The deepest laughter catches us by surprise. We can't schedule magic. We can only allow room for it. Relaxation, too, belongs to this family of experiences that can't be hunted or harnessed. It needs spaciousness, permission, and softness, not pressure or pursuit. The paradox also invites us to rethink our relationship with discomfort. Often, we try to relax as an escape from stress or anxiety. But if we're unwilling to be present with those feelings, if we try to push them away too quickly, we create tension around the very thing we want to release. Sometimes, the path to relaxation means first being with what is uncomfortable. Letting yourself feel the tightness in your chest without trying to fix it. Letting the restless thoughts swirl without trying to suppress them. In this space of radical acceptance, the nervous system begins to unwind. Not because you forced it to, but because you gave it room. There's a kind of humility in learning to not try. It asks us to surrender the illusion that we're in control of every part of our experience. It asks us to be with ourselves as we are, not as we think we should be. And in that acceptance, something softens. We begin to realize that the tension was never in our muscles or our minds alone. It was in our expectations, our striving, our unwillingness to let go. And yet, letting go does not mean indifference. It doesn't mean we stop caring or that we abandon intention. It means we shift the quality of our effort from forceful to gentle, from rigid to responsive. It's the difference between gripping a steering wheel and lightly holding it. One tires you out, the other keeps you connected and in flow. When we stop trying to achieve relaxation and instead create conditions where it can emerge, we begin to live in a more easeful way. Ultimately, the trying not to try paradox is an invitation to trust life, to trust that things will unfold even without your constant management, to trust that your breath will breathe you, your heart will beat, your body will rest, your mind will settle. Not perfectly, not always predictably, but naturally when allowed. You don't have to earn stillness. You just have to make space for it. So if you find yourself lying awake, trying to relax, trying to be at peace, trying to stop trying, remember this paradox. Ease isn't something you grip, it's something you lean into. The more tightly you chase it, the more it slips away. But when you exhale, soften your gaze, release the need to control, you might find that peace was there all along, waiting not for effort, but for openness. The fear paradox. Fear is a natural part of being human. It's ancient, powerful, and deeply wired into our biology. It alerts us to danger, protects us from harm, and prepares us to survive. Without fear, we would not have made it this far. But fear, like fire, must be understood and respected. Left unchecked, it spreads. Ignored, it festers. And strangely, the more we try to escape it, the larger it becomes. This is the fear paradox, the strange truth that running from fear makes it grow, while facing it makes it shrink. It is a contradiction that sits quietly at the heart of human behavior. shaping decisions, relationships, and the stories we tell ourselves about what is possible. We often think of fear as something to avoid. When it rises, we retreat. We change the subject, turn away, distract ourselves, or numb the sensation. We tell ourselves we're too busy, not ready, or that it doesn't matter. But avoidance doesn't make fear disappear. It pushes it underground. And like a seed planted in darkness, it grows. It begins to influence our choices in subtle ways. We say no to opportunities. We settle for less. We stop reaching, stop expressing, stop living fully. Not because we've made a conscious decision, but because fear has quietly taken the wheel. Avoiding fear gives it power. When we refuse to look it in the eye, it becomes monstrous in our imagination. It feeds on our resistance. It expands in the shadows. But the moment we turn toward it, gently, curiously, it begins to change. It becomes less overwhelming, less absolute. We begin to see it not as an all-powerful enemy, but as a messenger, a signal, a sign that something matters, that there is something here to explore, to learn, to grow from. Facing fear does not eliminate it immediately, but it strips away the illusion that it controls us. This paradox shows up in everyday life. The person afraid of public speaking, who avoids every opportunity to be seen, eventually feels smaller and more self-conscious. The person afraid of rejection, who never opens their heart, ends up isolated, not protected. The person afraid of failure, who never tries, misses the chance to succeed. In each case, the fear grows not because the threat is growing, but because the avoidance feeds it. We become trapped in the very thing we were trying to escape. And yet, when we take even a small step toward our fear, something shifts. The unknown becomes known. The imagined disaster often fails to materialize. And even when it does, we discover that we are more resilient than we thought, that we can survive discomfort, that fear is not a wall, but a doorway. On the other side is not just relief, but expansion, growth, confidence, a deeper sense of self-trust. The fear paradox also has a psychological component. When we avoid fear, we teach our brain that the feared situation is dangerous. We reinforce the fear loop. But when we face fear, even in small, safe steps, we give our brain new data. We prove that we can handle it, that we can walk through the discomfort and come out stronger. This is the principle behind exposure therapy, one of the most effective treatments for anxiety. It's not about eliminating fear, but about building tolerance. Courage is not the absence of fear, it's the willingness to move forward in spite of it. This paradox also invites us to reconsider our relationship with fear. We tend to treat it as an enemy, but fear is often a signal of aliveness. It shows us where we care deeply, where something meaningful is at stake, where we are brushing up against the edges of our comfort zone. When we learn to listen to fear without obeying it, we gain clarity. We begin to distinguish between the fear that protects us and the fear that limits us. There's also a spiritual dimension to this paradox. Many wisdom traditions teach that fear is a teacher, that it shows us where we are still holding on, where we are clinging to control, certainty, or ego. In this view, fear becomes an invitation, not to run, but to surrender, to trust, to let go. And in letting go, we often find not danger, but peace. Not loss, but freedom. Facing fear doesn't mean diving headfirst into every terrifying situation. It means turning toward the fear with honesty, naming it, feeling it, asking what it's trying to protect, and then deciding, with intention, whether to move forward. It's about reclaiming choice, reclaiming agency. Fear may still walk beside you, but it no longer dictates your path. There's a surprising gentleness in this approach. We don't conquer fear by beating it into submission. We dissolve it by understanding it, by allowing it to speak, and then choosing a wiser voice to follow. In doing so, We begin to rewrite our story, not as someone who is ruled by fear, but as someone who has learned to walk through it. And perhaps that's the deepest lesson of the fear paradox. That fear will always exist, but it doesn't have to define us. It can guide without governing, inform without imprisoning. The goal is not to live without fear, but to live beyond it. To build a life not limited by our nervous system, but inspired by our courage. So the next time fear rises, whether it's the fear of judgment, of failure, of change, or of being seen, pause. Don't run, don't numb. Just notice, breathe, ask what it's pointing to, and then take one small step in its direction. Not to prove anything, but to remind yourself that you are more than your fear, that you are capable of standing in the fire and walking through. The fear paradox teaches us that the path to freedom is not around fear, but through it. That every act of avoidance makes fear larger, while every act of courage makes you larger. And that the life you want, the full, meaningful, vibrant life, is waiting on the other side of the very thing you're afraid to face. Not because fear will disappear, but because you'll stop letting it hold you back. The confidence paradox confidence is often misunderstood. We associate it with boldness, certainty, and an unwavering sense of self. We picture the confident person as someone who speaks loudly, stands tall, and never seems to question themselves. But true confidence is far more subtle and far more paradoxical. The most genuinely confident people are often the ones who admit their doubts, acknowledge their flaws, and ask questions without shame. Meanwhile, those who project an image of absolute certainty are often masking deep insecurity. This is the confidence paradox, the strange truth that real confidence includes vulnerability, while arrogance often hides fear. In many ways, this paradox defies cultural expectations. We're taught that to be taken seriously, we must appear strong at all times. We must present ourselves as sure, composed, and always in control. But this performance creates distance. It closes off conversation. It suggests that we already know everything we need to know. And it's often exhausting to maintain. Behind the mask of arrogance is usually someone afraid to be exposed. Someone afraid that if they show uncertainty, they will be seen as weak. But true confidence is built on something sturdier. It's not the absence of doubt. It's the ability to hold doubt without being shaken by it. It's the capacity to say, "I don't know," without losing self-worth. It's the willingness to ask for help, to own mistakes, to keep learning. Confidence is not loud, it's steady. Not showy, but grounded. It doesn't need to impress, because it has nothing to prove. The most confident people tend to be the most curious. They ask questions not because they don't know anything, but because they're secure enough to admit they don't know everything. They see uncertainty not as a threat, but as an opportunity to grow. And in doing so, they create a space around them where others feel safe to be honest as well. Their humility doesn't diminish them, it draws people in. This paradox is especially visible in leadership. The best leaders are not the ones who pretend to have all the answers. They're the ones who empower others, who listen deeply, who create environments where people can speak freely. They admit when they're wrong. They learn from those around them. And their confidence comes not from ego, but from alignment with their values. They don't need to dominate. They lead from within. Arrogance, on the other hand, is brittle. It demands attention. It resists feedback. It creates the illusion of confidence, but lacks its foundation. Arrogance says, "I know everything." Confidence says, "I'm always learning." Arrogance avoids vulnerability. Confidence embraces it. One is driven by fear of being seen as weak. The other is driven by the courage to be fully seen. The confidence paradox also invites us to examine our own self-image. We all have moments of doubt. Moments when we feel like imposters, when we fear we're not enough. True confidence doesn't deny these feelings. It includes them. It says, yes, I feel nervous, and I'm still capable. It says, I'm not perfect, and I still belong. This integration of doubt and self-belief is what makes confidence real. It doesn't require us to be invincible. It asks us to be whole. There's also a deep sense of freedom that comes with this kind of confidence. When you no longer need to appear perfect, you become more present, more open, more human. You stop measuring your worth by how flawless you seem. You stop needing to win every argument, to be the smartest in the room, to pretend that nothing affects you. And in that release, you gain strength. You become more adaptable, more trustworthy, more resilient. This paradox becomes even more powerful in relationships. When we pretend to have it all together, we create distance. But when we let someone see our uncertainty, our hesitation, our true selves, we create intimacy. We show them that we're not above them, we're beside them. That kind of openness builds trust. And trust is the soil in which real confidence grows, not just in ourselves, but in each other. In communication, too, the paradox plays out. People who admit uncertainty in their words, who say, I believe, instead of I know, or I wonder, instead of I declare, are often heard more clearly. Their words invite rather than instruct. They don't shut down conversation, they open it up. And that openness is what allows ideas to evolve, for truth to emerge, for mutual respect to flourish. True confidence also allows for failure. It doesn't see setbacks as proof of inadequacy, but as part of the process. It knows that failure doesn't define your worth. It's simply a moment, a lesson, a redirection, a necessary step on the path to growth. The person who fails and tries again is far more confident than the person who never risks anything for fear of being wrong. There is something deeply empowering about embracing this paradox. It means you no longer have to wait until you feel 100% certain to take action. You can move forward with courage, even with your doubts in tow. You can speak your truth, even if your voice shakes. You can trust yourself, not because you're perfect, but because you're willing to grow. That's what makes confidence powerful. Not its perfection, but its permission. To be human, to be vulnerable, to keep going anyway. So the next time you feel unsure of yourself, remember this. Doubt is not the enemy of confidence. It's part of it. Your ability to face your uncertainty, to admit when you're unsure, to ask for support, that's where true strength lies. That's where connection begins. That's where transformation happens. The confidence paradox reminds us that confidence is not about never being afraid. It's about not letting fear stop you. It's not about always being right. It's about being real. And when you embrace that truth, you no longer have to perform confidence. You become it, not in arrogance, but in authenticity. Not in perfection, but in presence. And in that quiet, steady place, you discover a version of yourself that doesn't need to shout, because it already knows it belongs.